All right, so welcome to the first lecture on classification. Let me click present here. So what we're looking at with this is the scientific study of classification, which is sometimes called taxonomy, from the Greek word taxa, which means group. And so whenever we start looking at plants and animals and bacteria and all the other living things, we start grouping things together. And this study of all of this is taxonomy. You name the organisms and you put them in a particular group. And we can have this individual who's very dapper in their wig, Carolus Linnaeus, to thank for our modern system of classification. He's not the first person to come up with ways of classifying things. Even the ancient Greeks, like Aristotle, had a system of taxonomy or classification. His way of classifying it was, does it live in land? Does it live in water? Does it live in the air? Now, that works pretty good until you take something like a duck, which can walk on land, swim in the water, and fly through the air, and then it gets a little bit more complicated. So this, our current Linnaean system, because of Linnaeus here, that we're using, that he published in 1735, he figured out or outlined some of the basics that we still use today. Two of the things that he came up with was the idea of a universal naming system, and he also came up with the idea of a hierarchical classification system. When we say a hierarchy, it's like you have one large group, and you have subgroups in that, and then you have subgroups in that, which we'll take a look at a little closer. But let's go ahead and first off take a look at, from Linnaeus, that we still use this today, is the idea of a scientific name. So every single organism that has been classified and put in a group has an official scientific name. Now, that's not one we necessarily commonly use. We use common names all the time, like this bird here that is on this slide. What do you think that is? What would you call that? You've seen them around here. What is that called? Is it a vulture? Is it a turkey vulture? Is it a buzzard? A turkey buzzard? I've heard all four of those names been used to name this same organism. Those are all great examples of common names. So the common name is a name that is used in an area for an organism. The problem with that is you might have more than one common name for the same organism, like our buzzard vulture thing here, or you could have the same name be used to refer to multiple organisms. So two things could have the same name, common name. So in order to help keep that from happening, we want to give something a scientific name. So in this case, this bird here is Cathartes aura, which we call a buzzard or a turkey vulture or whatever you want to call it, right? If you go anywhere in the world and you say Cathartes aura, someone can look that up and know that if they know it's a scientific name, they can look that up and then determine what organism it is, this exact thing. A good example of something that has multiple names is a woodchuck and a groundhog. Woodchucks and groundhogs are exactly the same organism. So if you said woodchuck to someone, they might think of one organism or think it's something different than a groundhog. They're really the same thing. A lot of plants especially have multiple names, and a lot of plants get called the same thing for two different things. So if we want to approach something scientifically, we want it to be global in scope. That is, anywhere you go in the world and you say that scientific name and you specify that thing, then that would be your scientific name. Okay, so let's move right along here. All right, binomial nomenclature. So one of the things that Carolus Linnaeus said is not only should we give everything a scientific name that's unique to it, no other thing has that name, but that name should be a two-part name. The term for that is binomial nomenclature. So binomial means two, so two nomen, two names, And then nomenclature is naming system. So this is a two-part naming system that Carolus Linnaeus developed. We still use this today. It works really good. Now, we've studied bacteria in the past, and some of the names of the bacteria that you guys looked up was something like Escherichia coli or E. coli or Streptococcus pyogenes or whatever. Those are examples of two-part scientific names. We use those a lot of times with bacteria. But other things like cats and dogs, we don't commonly use their scientific name. They're just not as used as often. Some ways, a way to approach this is if you see a name that's Latinized and written in italics with the first word capitalized and the second always lowercase, then that is an example of a scientific name. So right down here, we have Felis domesticus, which is a cat, a domesticated house cat. We also have Canis lupus. Do you know what that is? So Canis is in the dog or wolf family, and lupus means wolf. So the Canis lupus would be a wolf. What about Canis familiaris? That's a regular dog. Okay, that's a familiar dog. So Felis concolor, for example, another genus, same genus, different species name, would be a mountain lion or puma, or what is the other name for a mountain lion or a puma? It's the same thing. They're all Felis concolor. All right. So we have different, you can see there that there's different common names, but if you say Felis concolor, you're talking about that exact species. All right. So every living thing has one of these names. We're Homo sapiens, or wise people, is our name. And so whenever you see any sort of scientific article on something, it will always make sure to say we are talking about this exact organism, and that exact organism has this two-part name. The first part is what is called the genus name. The second part is the species identifier. So our example, like our Felis, was like the cat, the purring cat family. The Felis domesticus was a house cat, whereas a Felis concolor was a mountain lion. Canis lupus is a wolf. Canis familiaris is a dog. I can't remember exactly what a coyote is right now, but it is Canis. What is it? I can't remember right now. It's a Canis something. All right. And so that is a canine, right? We get the word canine from that. So you can always tell not only what the species identifier is, you can tell what its genus is. Its genus are its really closely related organisms. So if you had two things that were closely related, they might share the same genus. They would have a different species identifier name. Like we saw this with the bacteria, that there's several different varieties of Salmonella. And so Salmonella is a genus name, which is why it's always capitalized. And then you have your other species identifiers after it, right? So this is pretty important if you're ever working with any organisms, whether that be plants or animals or bacteria, to understand how this binomial nomenclature works, that we've got this two-part name with the genus and the species. We always capitalize the genus, never capitalize the species. The genus, the first word, shows what you're related to closely, and then your second part is like, oh, you're one of those cats or dogs, but you're this particular one of those cats or one of those dogs. Okay. Oops. So that was the first thing Linnaeus gave us, was this two-part naming system, binomial nomenclature. Every living thing has its own unique name. Two parts. The second thing was this hierarchical classification system. His classification system did not have these 7 levels because we've got so many things to classify, and we can understand differences between things really well. We get these 7 levels of classification. And this is from most broad to most specific. So as we see, our last one says species. We were just talking about how your scientific name is made up of your genus and your species. Your exact what you are, your immediate family, and then you've got your ascending orders until you get to the kingdom level. Okay, so like the king's at the top, right? And then the king has subjects under him, like his dukes, and his dukes have knights under them, and the knights have what, squires. The squires have whatever, and then finally you get down to the peasants if you were making this a feudalism example, right? But this is hierarchical, okay? The king is at the top of the hierarchy. It's to the top level, right? And we've talked about some of different kingdoms whenever we were talking about bacteria, is that you had archaebacteria and eubacteria were two kingdoms, distinct groups of organisms that were unlike other groups of organisms. We only have 6 kingdoms. We have plants, animals, fungus, protists, archaebacteria, and eubacteria. If we find any living thing, it will fit in one of those kingdoms, and we'll talk more about those different kingdoms next time, right? But within each kingdom, the kingdom of animals or plants, there's multiple phyla. Okay, phyla are large groups. Classes are groups, within a phyla. So like in animals, if we do the kingdom of animals, maybe a phyla would be the arthropods. So that is everything with a jointed leg. And so a class could be something like the crustaceans or the insects, right? They're kind of related. They've got an exoskeleton, but a crab and a grasshopper are not the same thing. And so those are different classes. And then within each organism's class, like in the insect class, you have different orders. Like, are they the orthopterans, which are grasshoppers, or the lepidopterans, which are butterflies and moths? So there's all these different orders within that class. There's different classes within a phyla, and there's different phyla within a kingdom. Yet everything in that kingdom shares certain characteristics. Like in the case of animals, they eat stuff and they don't have cell walls, right? And then you get down into families and genuses and species, right? Okay, we will pick back up next time and we will take a look at all the different characteristics of kingdoms.